Breaking right now, an extraordinary row has broken out between the Vice President of the United States of America, JD Vance, a really important guy, and arguably two of the least important people in British politics, Alastair Campbell and Rory Stewart, who host the centrist dad lefty podcast Rest is Politics. So Inevitable West summed this up quite nicely, and since then the story has gone viral. Let me take you through it. So as Calgie from the Daily Express explained, the Vice President of the free world taking time out of his day to drag the rest of politics here for it. So it all started off from this interview. And by the way, JD Vance is doing the most incredible interviews at the moment where he just rips into his mainstream media protagonists. And it started with this particular interview. Watch.
But there's this old school, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way, that you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country. And then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. A lot of the far left has completely inverted that. They seem to hate the citizens of their own country and care more about people outside their own borders. That is no way to run a society. And I think the profound difference that Donald Trump brings to the leadership of this country is the simple concept, America first. It doesn't mean you hate anybody else. It means that you have leadership, and President Trump has been very clear about this, that puts the interests of American citizens first. In the same way that the British Prime Minister should care about Brits and the French should care about the French, we have an American president who cares primarily about Americans, and that's a very welcome change.
What is President Xi doing? What is Vladimir Putin
He's looking
doing?
after the Chinese. Putin is looking after the Russians. They're entitled to do that. Thank God we now have an American president who's looking after the citizens of his own country.
And Rory Stewart, remember, is the guy who bet £100,000, or at least said he was going to bet £100,000 on Kamala Harris winning the White House because he was just so confident no one would be so stupid to elect Trump and JD Vance. So he posted, in response to that interview, a bizarre take on John, less Christian and more pagan tribal. We should start worrying when politicians become theologians, assume to speak for Jesus and tell us in which order to love. JD Vance, and this is where it gets shocking. Okay, this is not normal. I know we have X rows all the time. But JD Vance, the Vice President of the USA in office, decides to respond directly to Rory Stewart. And he writes, just Google Auto Amoris. Aside from that, the idea that there isn't a hierarchy of obligations violates basic common sense. Does Rory really think his moral duties to his own children are the same as his duties to a stranger who lives thousands of miles away? Does anyone? I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The problem with Rory and people like him is that he has an IQ of 110 and thinks he has an IQ of 130. This false arrogance drives so much elite failure over the last 40 years. And oh my goodness, he is right, because in that tweet, let's think about it. JD Vance could be talking about George Osborne. He could be talking about David Cameron. He could be talking about Tony Blair. Actually, he could be talking about any centrist dad that has destroyed the UK that we love. Alastair Campbell, however, decided to make it all about poor him. Very odd that the Vice President of the USA has nothing better to do than troll my podcast partner. Perhaps he has not been given a proper job by the narcissist-in-chief. Charlie Peters from GB News responded to that, saying you can't dismiss a cutting takedown as trolling just because it's your mate getting cooked. And Toby Young of the Free Speech Union agreed, saying he's not trolling Rory Stewart. He's responding to a criticism Rory made of him. If JD Vance is engaging, you should welcome that, not sneer that he doesn't have better things to do. Play the ball, not the man. My superstar panel with me, James Glancy and Myron Sentil Nathan. Myron, I mean, look, I have mixed views on this because obviously I completely agree with JD Vance, and his summation of the centrist dads who have destroyed the West was just spot on, just absolutely perfect. At the same time, I'm a bit like, you just know Alastair Campbell and Rory Stewart love this. But first, The reason you're watching this show is because you know that these days it's almost impossible to trust the mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to patrol social media. And that's for a very good reason, given the Brexit debate, COVID debacle, and demonisation of Donald Trump. But I have the solution. Today's sponsor, Ground News, was created by a former NASA engineer to provide you with the only safe way to consume the headlines. So you can go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out for yourself. But what I want to do now is show you this incredible website and app in action. So what we're going to do is take the recent story, you will have heard us talk about it on the show, Elon Musk falling out with Nigel Farage all over Tommy Robinson, the political prisoner. The left-wing legacy media tried to whip this up and destroy all three men. But what's great when you look at the story on Ground News, and you can do this, by the way, with any story in the news, not just this one, but this is just one example. So Ground News has collated the 230 sources in one place. It then instantly shows how the story is being covered by the media, broken down by whether those organizations lean to the left or right. It's called its bias distribution service. Then you can see every article about the topic broken down by the political position and ownership of the publication. So in this case, it shows that Fox News, an outlet on the right, gave a fair analysis, whereas the likes of Mediaite and The Independent on the left didn't, which isn't a surprise, I guess. But what's so great about this app and website is that Ground News gets to know you personally, providing you with news stories you're interested in. You can choose lots of different categories like Brexit or Donald Trump or Premier League football. But it also analyzes your own biases and comes up with potential blind spots that you might not be hearing about. So I know you love the news. That's why you're watching Outspoken. But you probably don't trust the legacy media. Ground News gives you the tools to understand the truth about what is really going on in the world. I can speak personally and say it's now the only way I read the news. I have the app on my phone. It allows me to see through media bias and manipulative narratives without having to rely on the MSM to define what is true. So go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. You can subscribe through my link for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access. Ground News is all subscriber funded. For less than a Netflix subscription, actually. It means you can get all the world's news in one place and think for yourself. It truly has been a real game changer, I guess, for a news junkie like me. So let me repeat the address, ground.news/outspoken, or you can use the QR code on screen if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble. And the description is the link is in the description in the show notes below. But now, back to the show.
Yeah. But what JD Vance is doing is he's highlighting the profound difference between those who believe in the nation state and sovereignty, and it's a Brexit day today, so that's quite appropriate, and the globalists. And so these are two different paradigms that we find ourselves in. And our politicians, in part, who are being kind of governing the situation, are globalists. But JD Vance, he really brings up a really profound point that exposes the psyche of the globalists by invoking Christian theology, actually. And what he says is, to actually love humanity, or I want to, change the world, that's an idea, that's a fantasy. But the person next to you is a reality. Your family is a reality. Your community is a reality. Your fellow countrymen is a reality. And if you can't love them and put them first, what on earth are you doing running off to try and fix the globe, right? It makes no sense. And this comes back to what Jordan Peterson has also said. Tidy up your room before you try and fix the perils of the world, right? It's just a simple understanding that Rory Stewart doesn't understand, and it exposes the sheer delusional, ungrounded arrogance of pursuing this fantasy of globalization. We will serve the world. We will fix climate change. We will solve the poverty of other nations. But while we got 50,000 people dying in corridors in A&E, while potentially 4,000 pensioners will die because of their winter fuel allowance being taken away from them. That's the situation we're in. And JD Vance has just completely exposed them for what they are.
What did you make of it, James?
There's two really important points. I'd say one, do not engage with these two narcissists, Rory.
Yeah.
and Campbell. I'm annoyed at Vance for giving them up.
I sort of agree.
But he said something interesting. He said, every leader, it's their job to put the interests of their nation first. Well, not Keir Starmer. just like the QC Philip Sands, who's representing Mauritius to take British sovereign territory, the Chagos, off Britain, who's also happens to be Starmer's mate. Keir Starmer doesn't put the interests of Britain first. He puts international law first. He puts responsibilities to climate change before the British interests. So we need a bit of what Vance is talking about, putting the British national interest. Not a bit of that. We need that in its entirety, because that's what's been missing since 1997. People putting the British national interest first.
Can I just add, Dan?
Yes,
it's
please
not
do.
just it's not just statesmen that are doing this. It's actually law that is doing this. Human rights law actually puts the global citizen ahead of the British citizen. And that's the reason why, even if you have politicians who are well-meaning, they're going to struggle against our constitution that is pitted against the British citizen itself. And that's what we need to fix.
Yeah, well, we do. And getting rid of the HRA, the Supreme Court, restoration of the British Constitution pre-1997 is the only way to put the national interest first. That's a big piece of work that the right is going to have to deal with and get ourselves ready for 2029.
Exactly. It is a fundamental difference. I totally agree. However, at the same time, there is just that little part of me that thinks you're completely right, James. Don't engage, JD. This empowers them. One of the things where the left is quite effective sometimes is just ignoring folk on the right who they don't want to give a voice to. And I think maybe sometimes we should do the same thing. By the way, I should say, if you do want to follow some real independent media, James is now on Substack, Outpost Films, right, James? And your brilliant documentary on Afghanistan is there, and I am recommending Outpost on my Substack, so you can find it via that, www.outspoken.live. But James Glancy and Myron Central Nathan do stand by. In just 1 minute, this fascinating story about whether a taxi driver has a right to turn down a lift from a morbidly obese woman. She says not, and she's suing. So what does that say about our society today? Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.